So James has been addressing these people who are going through all sorts of trials and explain to them that this is part of life. And sometimes we don't remember that this Bible doesn't promise that once we start following Jesus, like all of our trials are going to go away. In fact, if anything, it increases. But then he goes on and he explains that not only are trials part of life, but temptation itself is part of the Christian life. In the same way, there are those who have this weird thought that, well, once I become a Christian, then all of my evil desires will just leave me. And James is saying, no, it's just like those trials. They'll still be there. And now the temptation will be there. And then he explains how to deal with it. In verse 13, he says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. So he explains, okay, when these urges arise in you, he goes, let no one say when he's tempted. The term here is a command. It's a real strong force. It's like, don't you dare say God is tempting you. He says, don't make this about him, because he is not tempted. He doesn't tempt other people. Don't use God and evil in that type of sentence. But then he explains in the very next verse, he says in verse 14, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. He says the origin is your own desire, and most of us hate to hear that. We want to blame him for any desire, and he says, no, God doesn't tempt. He has nothing to do with that evil. That came from you. Don't make this about him. It's about something in you. It's your own desire. The origin of this desire is not God. Okay? He's good. The evil doesn't come from him. It comes from within you, and that's a difficult thing for a lot of us to swallow, to go, well, because we all want to believe, no, I'm a good person, and that's not from me, and it's in our nature to blame. This is ever since God created man and that first sin with Adam and Eve. You think, he's like, well, it's that woman you gave me. And she's like, well, it was the serpent's fault. And here it's like, well, God, you made me this way, or you put that temptation, or you lured me. He goes, no, that was you. You were lured and you were enticed. And it's this picture of a fish like going for the bait, like being lured, something in him going, I want to go for it. And once that desire, and we know, for all of us, that feeling of something that we know is wrong, but we want it anyways. And what it says is that when his desire, when it has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So there's something in us that longs for something that God says is wrong or evil, but we want it anyways. And it says you have a choice at that moment, just like that fish that's being lured away. Either I go and I grab it, or I swim away. And in the same way, as you're tempted, you have that choice. And he says the moment you go for it, he says it's a conception that takes place, and he calls that sin. And he says as that sin goes on, it produces death. And it's a very graphic picture. It's actually talking about childbirth, about conception, and then once it's grown and it's ready to be born, it's a really graphic, ugly picture, sad picture of a stillborn baby. It brings forth this death. And it's such a clear image of sin where you're so anticipating, thinking, this is going to bring me pleasure, this is going to bring me pleasure. And it's that awful feeling of the baby's born and it's stillborn, and it actually brings you the most depressing feeling, that awful, sick feeling. He goes, that's what sin's going to do to you. It's going to look so good, and you're going to anticipate, like, this is going to bring me pleasure. This is going to be so good. This could lead to something good. Every single time, it's going to lead to death. At some point, whether in this life or the next, it's going to end in this awful, depression of, oh, I thought it was going to end well, and it ends in death, in misery. And that word for death there, it refers to the soul leaving the body, and in a spiritual sense, it's your soul being separated or leaving God. And that's the end result of sin. And that's why he says in verse 16, do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. He's saying, I love you, and I don't want you to be deceived by this. I don't want you to be taken away by it. And he says, every good and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow due to change. He says, don't be deceived by the deceitfulness of sin. He goes, man, there are good gifts that don't come from within here, and there's evil coming out. There are good gifts coming from the Father, and it's not a trick. It's not a bait and a switch. It's a perfect gift. And he's saying, don't be deceived by the other stuff. Swim towards God. What he gives you is going to fulfill. Jesus came so that we could have life, and life abundantly, and it's something that lasts, that doesn't end in regret. Like life to the full. It's the thief that comes to steal and kill and entice you so he can destroy you. And I don't know what you're struggling with. I don't know what that lure is in your life right now, that you've got a choice. Or do I go after it? And God's saying, don't do it. Don't be deceived. It will end in death. It's never worked. God is not mocked. Anytime we pursue something that he says is sin, it's going to end in death. And he says, instead, swim away. And not just swim away, but swim towards me. God's saying, look, I'll be your shepherd. I'll give you everything. I'll get it to where your cup is overflowing, but you've got to swim away from that temptation, whatever it is in your life right now. And what James is saying, he's going, my beloved brethren, swim away. God offers so much more. He can be your shepherd. He'll have your cup overflowing to where you just have no wants anymore. He can be that fulfilling. It's a good, perfect, complete gift. James is warning you. He's warning all of us. Temptation is real. It comes from within. It's all around us. And yet God offers something better. So I don't know what that looks like in your life, but James says if you stick around and you pursue that sin, you're headed for misery. None of us want that for you. God doesn't want that for you. He offers you life. He offers you a fulfilling life. Swim away now and go towards him and find the peace in everything that you've been looking for.